Within the past 24 hours, British veterans have marched on Downing Street to discard their war medals on David Cameron's doorstep to protest British airstrikes on Syria. Daniel Lenham, who served in Iraq and was deployed in operations for our war on Libya, joins me now. Daniel, welcome to Going Underground. Why were you and other British veterans on Downing Street throwing your medals at Number 10?
Personally, I felt obligated to do it, especially given the vote from last week with the extension of airstrikes in Syria. Collectively, obviously as an organisation, we believe that war isn't the answer to the problems of the 20s. Yeah, Veterans for Peace, yeah.
But individually, you throwing your medals onto the street?
Yeah. There's a certain subculture within the military that believe that nobility and there's a certain honour with the acceptance of medals. So for me, I think it speaks volumes for me to disconnect myself from that.
Before you threw them down, had you been hoping that MPs had begun to learn the lessons of the failed wars in Iraq and Libya?
Yeah, I obviously was hoping that because it certainly seems like the old adage of the theory of insanity, continuing with the same behaviours, expecting different outcomes. But clearly, I thought the role of the politicians were to speak on behalf of the people, and I've spoken to a lot of my friends who are still within the military, who are somewhat pro-military, and even those people opposed the airstrikes into Syria. So,
how do you reflect? I mean, away from Syria for a second. How do you reflect on your part, as it were, in Britain's war on Libya and what Libya is today?
It's part of the process and part of the journey that I'm still ongoing with, and it can be difficult to process that because I played a part in especially in the Libya campaign. Of my role was to oversee and also to load weapons to aircraft, knowing that those aircraft were going to fly over Libya and to be released on the population of Libya. So that is quite difficult. It's quite difficult to accept that I was a component in that machine.
But separate from any humanitarian consequences, what about as regards British national security in terms of what the military did in Iraq, in Libya, and now in Syria?
Yeah, well, there's obviously a certain level of blowback to be expected from our involvement in the Middle East. I think there's this reverse understanding of cause and effect. We seem to have it backwards, that we believe in order to protect British national interests and security that we have to get involved. And I think more often than not, I think it is the aforementioned blowback from our involvement that then returns back to UK soil.
What lies do you think British soldiers are being told right now who are engaged in our wars in the Middle East?
I don't think that they're being told anything differently that the general public are being told, but I think you need to understand that when you're part of the military, you become institutionalized, you become indoctrinated, and I think for your own protection, you obviously have to invest in the belief of what you're doing is right. But for me, it was only towards the back end of obviously my career, my time in, that I really started to reflect and ask myself a lot of important questions, and that has been difficult, has been extremely difficult, and I'm still doing that to this day.
What about the Prime Minister being quoted as saying that people who are opposed to our aerial bombardment of Syria, that they are terrorist sympathizers?
I think, personally, it's completely not nonsense. To think that someone who has an opposing view, and personally myself, a diametrically opposed view to David Cameron, the Prime Minister, I revert back to the old George Bush statement in the speech where he said you're either with us or against us. And I think the spectrum is a lot wider than that. There's a lot more colours to it. It's not a black or white thing. It's not a binary thing. There's a lot more to it. So I don't think if you oppose dropping
advice would you give to currently serving British soldiers who've been told to engage in as the Syrian government sees it, a violation of their airspace, different to the Iraq campaign? I mean, Do you think they'd be aware even that following orders is no defence in international law? What should they be?
I think they are aware, but it's a very difficult system, especially when you're, for whatever reasons, whether that's ideologically, socioeconomically involved within the military. It's very difficult, but that's the audience that we're trying to get our message across now, because we're not only increasing the awareness to the general public, but we're trying to speak to those people, because someone is doing my job that I was doing for the Libya campaign. Someone's doing this very moment now for the strikes in Syria. So we're trying to speak to those people and get them to think outside of the military context and try to, I suppose, consider and comprehend the consequences for their actions that they're taking.
No danger that they'll just hate you and the organisation you're a part of, Veterans for Peace, they're unpatriotic?
There is that danger, but I always revert to, whenever the patriotism comes by, I always revert to Leo Tolstoy for patriotism, obviously being the last resort of scoundrels. So if I'm viewed, or as an organisation we're viewed, then I think we're asking the right questions. If that's the kind of feedback that we're getting, then yeah, we're stoking the right fires, shall we say.
And just briefly, you're getting more members of Veterans for Peace, and also, is there finally being done for those who have fought in these conflicts when they return home alive?
I don't believe. I think more often than not, having gone through the process myself, I class myself as one of the lucky ones. I returned back to the UK with all my limbs, not suffering from PTSD, but I don't think enough is being done. I think it's very much lip service more often than not with what the military does for those who've served overseas and returned back to the UK. Yeah.
And Veterans for Peace?
We are there for the veterans, but we're not dogmatic with our approach. You know, they contact us, and I think even since yesterday, membership we've attracted, I think, between 10 and 15 members since yesterday, and then hopefully from yesterday's ceremony, then that will just continue to increase and increase. So,
Daniel Lennon, thank you.
Thank you.
In a moment, some of the voices of a few of the UK veterans who in the past 24 hours marched on Downing Street to throw away their medals. But that's it for today. On Saturday, we ask a member of the Privy Council with access to government intelligence whether David Cameron was lying about 7 UK terror attacks planned in Syria to persuade British MPs to vote for war. You can get in touch via social media. Watch RT UK News with Bill Dodd on the hour from 7 till 10. See you on Saturday, the day stopped the war. Some dozen years after mobilising 1 million in London against the Iraq War, holds a mass rally against our war in Syria. Here's some British veterans.
I was brought up to believe that Britain was a good country and that we were involved in just wars.
Serving in Afghanistan really hammered home to me the futility of armed conflict.
I was getting rather annoyed with the distortion of the truth that was told on the British television.
I think it's important that we counter the myths and propaganda that the military push out about these wars.
The myth that anything which the military participates in is a noble cause.
Here in the 21st century, we are still using violence and military force as a political instrument.
I think we need to ask ourselves, are we worth more than that? Invading other nations simply to make rich men richer.
Yeah, the reason why I joined Veterans for Peace is that I was outraged by the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. I believe
happy about what's happening in Afghanistan, what's happening in schools where recruiters are going in, and I think there needs to be a counter voice.
As ex-servicemen, I think we've got a good platform for people to listen to us.
Veterans for Peace is aimed at providing, I would say, a more realistic view of what war really is.
We, having dutifully served our nation,
do hereby observe our greater responsibility to serve the cause of world peace.